All right, it's 4 minutes past. We'll let the waiting rooms kind of clear out as they folks come in. Welcome everyone to Elevate's Venture Capital and Growth Equity Forum. About 400 people register for it from across all of our partner universities and an all-star lineup of speakers that we have today that we'll introduce just shortly. Today's goal is to deep dive into all aspects of venture capital and growth investing, careers, and recruiting. For those that are new to the Elevate platform, I'm Kaushik. I'm the founder at Elevate. I've been a private equity investor since 2015. The agenda today, we're going to give you a brief overview on Elevate, speaker introductions, overview of the VC and growth equity career trajectories, the overall recruiting process, how to build your candidate story coming from various different backgrounds, what are effective networking strategies that you all can use, how to structure some of these introductory conversations as they go into recruiting, and then what the interview process looks like, and then what are sort of some considerations that you should have as it relates to summer internships, full-times, and other recruiting process. So to give you guys a quick overview of the forum, like I mentioned, we had about 400 people show up today. We had a similar private equity forum for recruiting a couple weeks ago. We've shared the video of that. We had 500 people attend that. And so you can go back and listen to that. We have an investment banking forum tomorrow featuring 15 investment bankers. So if anyone's interested in investment banking, you can check that out. To give you a perspective of sort of who all is sharing the room with you guys. It is all of our different private equity venture capital club partners across all the different universities that we're partnered up with. Speakers today, I'll have them do a quick intro in just 1 second. And then just give folks a background of Elevate. The goal is to solve 3 main challenges. One is education. So there's a huge gap, right, in sort of what is needed for entry and success into these careers as it relates to private equity, venture capital, et cetera. The way to fill that gap, right, is to build an education platform that's directly taught and you can learn from successful professionals and those who have been through the journey. In my opinion, that's the most efficient and effective, and it sort of pays forward in every generation. This session is a great example of that. This is our 20th private equity venture capital, growth IB session. And so it's sort of the building the next generation of talent. We expect all of you guys to be panelists on this thing next year, and so on and so forth. Number 2, networking. I think it's way too difficult to meet others who share similar career interests. It's too time consuming or sort of too hard to do that. So Elevate is a cross-university networking platform where you can meet other people based on common goals and interests. So take your MBA network and I'll multiply it right by 10, 15, 20 times. And then finally, recruiting. I think it's way too difficult for candidates to find high quality opportunities. And that's what we try to address as well. Why don't we start, guys, with the speakers giving a quick background. So let us start with just the folks I see on the screen. Alex Lee, do you want to do a quick intro about your background?
Sure, happy to. And thanks for inviting us, Kaushik. This is super cool. Wish we had this. Wish I was part of this when I was back in school. But give a quick introduction. I'm a principal here at Modern Venture Partners. We're an early stage firm based out of the West Coast. My personal focus is on fintech, enterprise SaaS, and AI robotics. Before coming into venture, I was at the GSB, and then there I worked with a bunch of startups like Cruise, Voyage, Apex, and at mobility VC called Neo Capital. And then before that, I was in consulting, management consulting at Kearney, and I grew up in New Zealand, in case you can't tell from the accent. So I think I might be the only Kiwi on this call.
Right, Alex. We have to do the caption feature on Zoom at some point.
Exactly.
I can. You're good. Thanks, Alex, again for being part of this. Tremendous background. I think one of the things you'll notice about the speakers that we've assembled here, they all come from different backgrounds, not just industries that they focus on right now, but pre-MBA, right? Whether it's consulting, corporate, investing, et cetera. So we'll get to hear a lot of those backgrounds as well. Dana, why don't we go to you next from my alma mater, Chicago Booth?
Yes, Chicago Booth, give me all some love here. Nice to meet you all. My name is Donna Sun. I'm currently a healthcare investor at OCA Ventures, which is an early stage fund based out of the Chicago area. I was actually a biomedical engineer by training, thought I was going to become a doctor early on, but lo and behold, I disappointed my Asian parents by not becoming one when I realized it wasn't the right fit. Instead, I went to the dark side of becoming a management consultant as well. So I was at Accenture in their Boston office doing healthcare strategy consulting for a number of years. Eventually I saw the light and got involved and caught the entrepreneurial bug, got involved with some of those startups. And that's when I decided to kind of go in a totally different direction. as I was figuring life out, what the next career step meant, I thought that business school was a good interim step for me. So I went to Chicago Booth, was part of their full-time MBA program, continued to get involved with a ton of different startups, accelerators, and then frankly speaking, stumbled into a venture opportunity and just fell in love with the kind of work that we were doing there. But before I did that, I actually did a pit stop within the pharma world at Genentech Roche because of my life sciences roots that came calling to me. Good news is I learned a lot from that, and Genentech continues to be a customer with a number of our portfolio companies. Bad news is I realized that corporate life really, really isn't for me after giving it one more shot. So here I am again in the Chicago area. So let me know if you ever find yourself in the Midwest.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna. So great to have you on as well. Austin, we'll go kind of through the screen. Austin, please introduce yourself from our friends at Berkeley Haas.
Yeah, thanks, Kaushik. So hey, everyone, I'm Austin. I, like Kaushik mentioned, am with Berkeley Haas, and I, in addition to an MBA, I'm also doing a master's in public health. So I'm actually still here at school for another 2 weeks or so. But after graduating the end of this semester, I will be full-time with Foresite Capital. I've been part-time with Foresite for the past year and a half and was full-time over the past summer. Foresite is exclusively healthcare, a lot of biotech, but sort of getting more and more into IT and services in healthcare. And we are actually stage agnostic. So I would say our sweet spot is really the growth equity phase, but we will invest anywhere from early stage venture actually all the way through public. So a bit of a different in that sense. And pre-Haas, I worked for a small firm that did consulting and investing with early stage healthcare startups. So have always been healthcare focused, but more on the client services side before school. So excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you, Austin. Can we go to Aimee, please, next? Hi, Aimee, from our friends at Wharton.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aimee. Prior to Wharton, I was in consumer growth equity investing. And so coming to Wharton, part of what I was trying to learn is whether or not I really enjoy the early stage investing. And so have been doing a lot in VC. I did an in-semester internship at a seed stage fund last year called OCA Ventures, investing in the technology layer, kind of revolutionizing niche kind of old outdated industries. And then over the summer, I had an internship at True Beauty Ventures, which is a beauty and wellness focused stage agnostic fund, and still recruiting right now for full-time opportunities, but definitely hoping to stay within consumer investing going forward.
Thank you, Aimee. Welcome. Rishi from Columbia, please.
Thanks, Kaushik. Hi, everyone. Great to meet you here. My background prior to business school was in engineering originally. Started off my career initially as an engineer at Qualcomm, then went to Microsoft as a hardware engineer, then moved into product management and corporate development before coming to business school. And during my time in business school and right before starting my MBA, I worked at In-Q-Tel, which is CIA's venture arm. Mostly have been focused on deep tech investing, primarily within applied AI and quantum computing. Currently, I'm at Micron Ventures, which is the corporate venture arm of Micron Technologies. It's one of the big semiconductor memory manufacturers. So here I'm also focusing on AI hardware investments.
Excellent. Thank you, Rishi. And last but not least, Kyle from our friends at Wharton.
Hi, Kyle Jorgensen. I'm a second year at Wharton, currently working with Lux Capital doing deep tech investments. And my background prior to Wharton was working in the semiconductor industry, first in corporate development, and then I later moved into corporate VC, working on investments in advanced materials, life sciences, and chip technology. And that was really kind of where I fell in love with venture capital and kind of venture investing and the whole ecosystem, and really motivated my kind of move to go to business school and really pursue that kind of in a kind of more serious sense post MBA.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. For the speakers, guys, you guys already answered my first question of sort of why did you decide to pursue venture capital post MBA? So in the interest of getting through all the 20 plus questions that we have, in addition to the questions that we'll get from our audience, you guys can definitely put that in the chat. Let's go through sort of the why venture capital, what are firms looking for question. For sort of all of our speakers, what in your mind, right, are the most important things that funds and VC recruiters are looking for in candidates? Already we know from our 6 speakers, they have such a variety of different backgrounds. It was very different from our private equity session we had a couple weeks ago, where everyone sort of came from a much more similar background. So, anyone can start. Maybe Alex, we'll start with you, but others can comment as well. But what in your mind did you feel like recruiters looking for coming out of business school or from you coming from a consulting background?
Yeah, great question. So I fell into, I don't think I talked about this, but I fell into VC. So I had no plans to do venture post MBA, and the opportunity just presented itself to me. To answer you, so I also lead intern recruiting here at our firm. So that's a great question to ask me. We typically look for three things when we hire for part-time summer interns or whatever. One is the ability to kind of articulate yourself well, network well, and just we want to trust that if we put you in front of a founder, without someone like myself, one of our GPs in the room, you're going to represent the brand well, is the first piece. Second piece is being able to generate deal flow. So when we interview folks, we ask them, hey, what are some cool startups that you met or cool founders that you're tracking that are or will be raising? And we ask for an intro there. I mean, that's just, that's at least for our interns, we expect that from them. We don't have them making market maps or, writing blog posts or anything. We expect them to source deals. And so therefore, that's what we test for. And then the third piece, so our hiring program is a little bit different. So we only take folks who have interned with us. We don't take fresh folks, at least on the investing side. So, the third piece we look for is, how well does this person work with the team? Does he or she get along with myself, our GPs, our head of portfolio support, our CTO, our chief revenue officer. So we have the entire kind of senior leadership team meet every single person before we hire them. So yeah, summarize, three things. One is just how well do you present yourself? How well do you pitch and speak to founders? Two is, deal flow that you can generate. And third is, chemistry and just fit with the rest of the team. So that's us.
Great answer. And before I let the other panelists go, can I just dig into one of the things you said? You said kind of the behavioral piece. How do you present yourself? How do you want candidates to exhibit that? Like, should they go through, portions? Obviously, that comes across as an interview as well, and as well as the investment acumen part, right? So how do you find good companies? How would you like to see candidates exhibit that? Is it on their resume, or they come in prepared with a set of companies? What is your advice?
Yeah, so one is just the general, I don't want to say demeanor. Yeah, demeanor. Or like, is this person, energetic, positive? Is this someone who makes good first impression? Second piece in terms of how they demonstrate that is just coming prepared to the interview with some ideas. So I'll ask, hey, what verticals are you interested in? Oh, self-driving cars, great. Tell me about the top companies in the space and why you think they're strong. So I'll usually test them and just double click on a couple of times, just in terms of, this person is positioned well because a strong team or etc. Why do you think that? So I just want to know that someone has a strong kind of background. And I also look for folks who just know a space very well. So for our firm, we're probably not going to hire someone to do AI robotics because I have that covered, but we might be looking for someone who does, for example, crypto. And I'm a total degens. I trade on the side as well. So I'll ask them, hey, what do you know about the various trends or the various tokens that are coming out? So that's kind of what we look for, just folks who just know a space well, because ultimately when you put someone like that in front of a founder in that space, guess what? The first question the founder is going to ask you is, hey, what do you know about the space and why do you like us so much? And if they can't answer that, then it's a bad look for the firm as well.
Yep. No, great answer. And we're going to double click on sort of tactically things you guys can do in the recruiting process in the next section. Thank you, Alex, so much. So I'll have the other panelists sort of comment. Dana, Austin, Aimee, any of you guys on sort of what you found that firms are looking for or you're looking for on the other side in their recruiting process.
Yeah. So Alex covered a great base. To avoid duplicating what he said, I'll add a different dimension, which is come prepared with strong and justified opinions. Don't expect everyone to agree with you in that conversation, but you better come with some opinions, right? And what I mean by that is, if you think that there's certain areas that are underappreciated, talk about that. Why is it? Have companies prepared. Look at the venture company's portfolio, right? There should be companies that maybe you like, but there should also be ones where you might have some concerns about that. That's not an easy conversation to have, but that's showing that you're thinking differently and that you have rational and you're actually digesting it. Have something to offer that others don't. So I would really say come prepared with their opinions, because if we just wanted people to do exactly what we said, we don't need to hire others, right? We would just keep on doing that. We want fresh ideas, fresh perspectives. So bring that aspect and dare to be contrarian. It's scary, but that'll help you stand out.
Excellent. Great perspectives there, Dana. Aimee or Austin, anything from you guys on that?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Alex and Dan has already said, but I would just add that if you looked at how diverse our backgrounds is, I think what VCs really like is seeing how you're able to use your prior experiences and your very unique background and what new perspectives you can bring to a deal or a company or a thesis because of that. And I think that's what's really important and why you see such a diversity of backgrounds of people that enter VC. It's really very much like you have a passion for this and you really want to do it. And how can you bring things that you've learned in the past and experience that you've had prior and, bring that unique perspective to the table. And I think exactly what Dana said, kind of, what more are you bringing here? What kind of contrarian points of view are you bringing that, maybe they haven't thought about or that's, adding value to the firm in that way.
Yeah, great points. The diversity in background is so much more apparent in the VC side than any of these other careers that we deal with. So this is great. Any of the other folks, guys, Rishi, Kyle, or Austin on this point? And if not, we can keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to double down on what Aimee was just saying on playing to your strengths. I think there's multiple approaches to kind of breaking into venture, but in my case, the one that I found most successful was really going in with a kind of subject matter focused expertise thesis, and really just kind of playing to the strengths. In my case, it was kind of the deep tech verticals, and I did exactly what was just mentioned, developing a thesis on 2 to 3 areas that I really liked, having a point of view on the existing portfolio company or the funds that I was talking to, and always having at least 1 to 2 ideas to share with the investors, both in my intro emails, but also then during the conversations we had to make it worthwhile their time, but also help them understand that I'm coming in with a little bit of a deep thought.
And not much more to add kind of on what everybody else has said. I think those are all kind of key points in what a lot of VCs are looking for. But I'd also like to say the way kind of you come across when you're talking about these sectors is also very important. You need to come across as really passionate and really driven by the sectors you're interested in, because when you join the firm, this is going to be your kind of job day in and day out, and you have to kind of show that you have kind of that interest and that drive kind of when you're talking to different VCs or people at the firm, and kind of show that up front. So I think that's just very important to make sure that comes across, both to your research, but really be able to show that passion as well.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Super comprehensive on that. So let's go to the next in this. The question on the YVC section I wanted to get on is, what is the day-to-day like? There's a lot of our audience who are exploring VC as potential careers versus other things, right, that are out there that they may be thinking about. So maybe you guys can comment on a generic level. What is the day-to-day like? What are you expected to be doing? What are you actually doing? And sort of what that is composed of. So anyone can go on this one. And it could be from your summer internships or, for a couple of our second years, or for the full-timers, sort of what their day-to-day is like now.
I can kick it off here. So there's 3 main buckets that our interns typically get involved in. One of them is sourcing. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The second bucket is what I call the deeper due diligence and deal evaluation and processing aspect. And then the third bucket is portfolio activity support. That can be a lot of things depending on what that company needs. Sometimes it's market research. Sometimes it's helping us figure out, what are some possible targets for M&A, right? Sometimes it's completing competitive landscapes that are very helpful for our own intel as well. I would say for newer interns, they typically focus more on sourcing and then a little bit lighter on diligence, the least on portfolio company support. If for those that are here longer and have more experience, it kind of shifts the other way. So it's a little bit more involved with our internal portfolio in deep, heavy due diligence and a little bit lighter on sourcing.
Yeah, I guess I'd add to that, so in my experience also, the same 3 kinds of, vertical areas. On the sourcing side, I would say depending on the firm, in my experience, it was going over a course of 4 months, every 3 weeks, going into a specific industry vertical very deep, and kind of surveying the market landscape there, and then kind of identifying the top companies to go after within, in my case, Series A to Series B stage. So the sourcing aspect was very thesis driven. And then the other 2 are, the due diligence on existing, deals that are in the pipeline. And then the last part was kind of portfolio support, which mostly ended up being kind of on the market research and kind of go to market and kind of product development aspects.
Got it.
I would just add, I think it's a unique mix of really internal work where you're sitting and doing a lot of quiet research and going deep in an area, and a lot of external work where there are a ton of meetings, and both internally, but also meeting with founders and hearing pitches. And I think that at first can be sort of hard to go between the two, and to have, it's not a job where your day is always planned out. And so to think, okay, this morning can be set aside for some quiet work, and then all of a sudden you have 3 meetings on your calendar. And for some people, that is just not how they work. And so I'd say you need to be okay with that. And also just being the type of person who gets energy from those meetings and networking and going to events, because it's a lot of that, which is just can be a tough transition. So I would say it's pretty unique, and it's like quiet diligence focused work, and then it's external networking type of work.
I'm just gonna add, I think it also depends again on what your prior experiences have been. So the fund that I interned over the summer, they were just starting out and they closed the fund the summer I was there. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of brand building for them and a lot of fund building and a lot of kind of internal processes stuff. And that's also because I do have prior experience working at other funds. And so kind of because the teams are generally a lot smaller in venture capital firms, you really are expected to kind of just plug in wherever and kind of take on whatever projects they happen to have for you. So really being able to like problem solve for, things that you've never really done before or have done prior is also really important.
And one thing I want to highlight too is especially the difference, because prior to Wharton, I was working in corporate VC, and like the way you kind of operate in corporate VC and the way you operate in an institutional or independent VC with LPs is kind of different. It's the same buckets, but like the mix is a little bit different. I found that kind of working in Lux over the summer, I was definitely doing a lot more the kind of the sourcing and more kind of the front of the funnel there. And at a corporate VC, we're really diving a lot deeper into a smaller group of companies. And the sourcing, a lot of that sourcing also comes from our business units at the parent company. And so that kind of process is a little bit different, and that influences kind of your day-to-day as either an analyst, associate, or intern.
The only thing I'll add, so sourcing, diligence, all of that is, I think, common across every firm. One thing I'll add is, we think about VC as very much an apprenticeship model. So at the start, you might be joining calls with the GPs, getting used to kind of how that pitch works and kind of getting that experience. And then further down the summer, you'll be expected to source your own deals. And then, you'll take those calls by yourself, and you'll kind of be the first screen for, a lot of the founders. So it's, kind of like consulting in other industries. So it's kind of a learn by doing. We obviously have a training program, we have slides and all that good stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about doing it, and that's the best way we've seen in terms of how you can learn the skill set.
Excellent. Lots of insights on the day-to-day. Now let's get to thank you guys for sharing that. We'll come back to those concepts, because I think a lot, the common misconception is, look, I really want to be a VC. I'm still trying to figure out what it is, but oftentimes you're going to be asked to exhibit all of the things you need to be good at in the job, in the interview and the recruiting process. So we'll come back to that in a second, right? So this is sort of the next part of the discussion, which is where a lot of our folks are interested in, which is the actual recruiting process. So let's start first with timelines, right? So there's a lot of confusion, right, abound at our different schools and our different places about the timeline of when I should be doing what. So if you guys had some guidance and advice for this, generation of students here that are on the call, how do you think they should organize themselves around the timeline, the process, as it relates to summer internships, as well as sort of full-time recruiting for venture capital? So any of you guys can go.
I feel pretty strongly about this. It's never too early. so I'm in a 2.5-year program. I met my current boss my first year fall. So very early. And because it's such a relationship-based industry, it's all about building those relationships. And so it takes time, and you have to go meet them for coffee multiple times and stay in touch and find a way to become part of that person's brain. And so when they do need someone, they think of you. And so Foresite was not hiring interns the first summer. I met my boss that fall. We stayed in touch. Over the summer. I went to Genentech for that first summer. He introduced me to people at Genentech because we just had a great relationship. And then he reached out to me and said, we want an intern. I don't want to go through a hiring process. I know you. So it's all about just meeting these people and finding ways to stay present. And so reaching out to send articles that made you think of them, whatever. And I think it's you're not reaching out saying, hey, do you have a job? You're reaching out saying, I'm really interested in the work that you do, and I'd love to hear more about it. And I don't think it's ever too early to do that.
So awesome. You sort of already answered the question I was going to ask, but my follow-up to you was, how do you sort of, I think there's a lot of questions that we ask, you know, when we go to all these MBA campuses, they're like, hey, I'm sending them a lot of emails. Is it too annoying? So what did you feel like was the right cadence and sort of the content of the follow-ups that you were keeping, not just with this individual, but kind of all the people in the industry that you were meeting?
I think as long as you have something real that you're reaching out about, it's fine. I mean, like every week, absolutely not. I would say like max once a month, but just find reasons like, oh, hey, I'm going to this conference. Maybe, are you maybe going to be there and I could run into you or buy you a cup of coffee? Or I saw this article on this company. I know you mentioned you're really interested in X. I thought you might want to see this. So if you can make it seem like there's a real reason. This is going to depend on where you are and where you're recruiting, but being at Berkeley and I was only recruiting in San Francisco, it was pretty easy for me to say, oh, hey, I happen to be in San Francisco on Friday afternoon. Could I stop by and bring a coffee? I'd love to just catch up and see how you're doing. So like find reasons to be present. Again, like I think more than once a month is pretty aggressive, but quarterly, whatever. And I think eventually after doing that a couple of times, you'll then be on that person's radar. So they'll hopefully start to reach out to you with similar reasons.
I would also say, bring a good deal. Like act like you're already a venture investor. I remember the students who actually brought me a company and was like, hey, I've talked to the CEO, I've talked to the CTO. Oh, and by the way, I remember that this is your investment thesis in the digital health space. They could be a good fit for you. That blew me away because most people do not. They ask for my time, they ask for advice, which I'm happy to do, but we just don't have time for every single person that does that. But the ones that bring a deal and make an intro to that, we remember that. So, you know, do the work as if you're already one of our colleagues and you'll get noticed for sure.
Great point. I think this idea of transactional versus giving, you just kind of have to expect that eventually, right, it'll come back, and it's sort of your reputation as well. So don't be afraid to share your connections, share your idea, share your thesis, whatever. One of those will definitely hit. So Dana, thank you so much. Austin, super, super helpful. And we're going to dive into networking in a second, but also other people's comments on overall timeline. So at what point should people be doing what? Maybe, all the other folks on the call, it's now sort of end of fall, right? So for first years, what should they expect to be doing for the next few months in the winter and sort of in the spring to get themselves ready for summer internships? And then similarly for some of our second years, what should they be doing now to sort of get them ready for the full-time process, in the spring?
So I think like for the first years, this is a time I think everyone should be like, networking like crazy. And like by crazy, I mean like they should have a target list of funds that they've identified that they would want to, work on over the summer, and just try and like, meet all the associates, principals that they can get connected to. Warm intros are, generally the best if you can get them. But if not, just use your alumni networks or any kind of founder networks, your past work experience to get connected. And in terms of the recruiting timeline, like from my experience last year, right around February, March is when like the first round interviews will start coming up. So you want to be like top of mind at least over the next month and a half. And typically the interview process would be, you would get like, a first phone, Zoom meeting call. And then that one would be like kind of behavioral plus like, what I think Alex was mentioning earlier about talking about your, different interest areas. And then you would typically get, if you move on to the second round, you typically get a case study. But all in all, this whole process, depending on the firm, can last anywhere from like 2 weeks to about a month. But from last year's experience, I think, it'll start very early in like beginning of February.
Yeah.
I'd echo. Oh.
Cal, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I echo that same kind of sentiment. I think what we've seen at Wharton in terms of timeline is, things start popping up, more and more in February and January. I'd say that the thick of the bell curve in terms of, different opportunities for us was in around March for internships and to early April, but there's really long tails on either side. So, we had people getting offers as late as May. I heard of some people even early June, and people as early as actually even kind of this time. So in December, people were getting offers. So I think keeping your ear to the ground with things and keeping in contact with people is very important, because you don't always know when these are going to pop up. You just need to be have those connections to be present when the opportunity arises anywhere along that timeline. And then kind of in terms of what I did, and when you're talking to some other people, kind of what their thinking was in terms of preparing for recruiting. In the fall, I think a lot of, I think it's good to start early with networking for sure if you are prepared, but I would definitely, in my opinion, prioritize getting your thesis and getting your different startups to start talking to founders, start building that kind of knowledge now. Like prioritize that if you don't fully have that built out, and then really start hitting people kind of post holidays and start reaching out when you have that fully built out and you have possibly some contact with founders, be able to make some introductions, have that all built out by the time you get into the second semester.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add is just, so I agree with Austin and Kyle's point. I actually met my current boss before I even started at the GSB. And at that point, I had no interest in being in venture. So we would just literally just hang out and just getting to know each other because we enjoyed each other's company. But the other thing I'll add is founders are a great way to get to VCs. So for example, if any of my founders ever sends me a reference for a company, I'll definitely take. But if they're like, hey, this person is super sharp, met them, you should take the call. I mean, honestly, I'll probably just take it just because they're one of my founders and I want to make them happy. So that's something that's really, that's kind of a hack that you can think about. So if you meet, a founder who just raised, maybe one of your classmates who just raised from Sequoia, and you want to get to those folks, be like, hey, can I chat with the partner who led you around? And maybe they'll say yes. So that's I've had a few classmates who've done that, and it's worked out really well for them. So that's something interesting idea.
Excellent, awesome, guys. I think the summary is sort of, it's never too early to start. You never know what doors are going to lead to where. In terms of connections. Number 3, make sure you have your pitch or your story and your everything well laid out and prepared, because it is very obvious, to Dennis' point, when people have that and are presenting it well versus people are coming unprepared. And then number 4, don't be afraid to be generous and open with the contacts, networks, ideas, companies, et cetera, that you can have. You just never know kind of what that's going to lead to, right? So I think those are some of the thematics here on the timeline as well. Let's go into it specifically. We have so many people in the audience and all of our, kind of partner clubs that come from all these different backgrounds. So, all the 6 panelists, I'll kind of go through each of you guys. For someone who's coming from a pre-MBA, investing finance background, so like private equity, CVC, et cetera. So this is applicable to sort of Aimee and Kyle in our audience, or in our panel. What are the key steps that you guys, right, coming from an investing background already, need to show in order to kind of switch from either a later stage investing to an earlier stage VC, or sort of how should you round out your skill set in business school context to be ready for the VC journey? So either of you two guys can take it, and then we'll go through corporate strategy and then consulting with the next panelist.
I can go first. So I think one of the kind of what's missing from my background, I did banking and private equity. And so what's really missing from my background to go into VC is the operating experience. And so part of my struggle coming to school was like, should I go and do an operating internship at a startup to really gain that exposure and be able to say like, I've kind of, done that and know more about the founder side. But I think the advice that I was getting from people that I was talking to was, I can't say with a straight face that I'm an operator, having done just like an internship in operating. And so for me, it was how do I use what I already know, what my actual skill sets are, and kind of, use that instead as, what my value add is, as opposed to trying to be something I'm not. And so I think it is, because my background is very kind of financial focused, I would do better in strategies where the partners do think about deals more in that way. And so I think it is kind of using what you already know and what you kind of already have in your background. And if you do want to go to operating experience, definitely go for it. But I think for me, I kind of knew that I wanted to go into investing. And so just doing like an internship in operating wouldn't have really made sense if that's really what my end goal was. So I think that would be the major thing that I would say was missing. And I've talked to a lot of VCs that, whether or not it's worth it to go to operating. And I think there's kind of differing opinions depending on what you've done before. One of the funds that I interned at, both of the GPs, neither of them had any operating experience, and they were still able to raise a fund and be very successful in investing. So it is kind of like a choose your own journey sort of thing. Like what have you done? How can you really use that to your advantage and make that a part of your story?
Yeah. I mean, exactly that. I think, if you're coming from, whether it's corporate VC or, a kind of investing or finance background, it definitely helps to kind of lean into the experience that you have. And and that's kind of what was my thinking when I was going into kind of recruiting, for internships. Was my background was in corporate VC for semiconductors, and I was just trying to think, okay, broaden out from there, kind of broader deep tech, things that are related to that. I looked at different investments we made. I looked at our co-investors to look for different firms that are investing in similar areas, and I kind of leaned into my experience there and kind of built on it at school. And that was a lot of my my theses were kind of in that area, and that's I think that really helped in recruiting, and it lended credibility to kind of the different pitches and theses that I talked about. And when I talked about a subject, it was very helpful to have both having done the research, but having the background in that area made that argument much stronger. So that was very helpful. And I will say, I think the $1 million question for kind of a lot of people looking to go into venture is whether to go operating post MBA or go straight into venture capital. And I've heard, I talked with a lot of VCs and a lot of partners about this, and I've gotten varying opinions. It's probably close to 50-50 split of people telling me that what they should do one thing or should do another post MBA. And I think it really, at the end of the day, you just have to kind of see what fits for you. See, is this the right VC firm that I want to work at post MBA, or is there a startup that's really exciting for me? Go for that. But I think it's really going to be on a person-to-person basis and a firm to company basis on whether that's the right decision for you.
Lots of great points. We'll summarize in a second. Let's go to the folks who came from consulting. So Dana and Alex here. What did you guys feel were the big holes that you guys had to fill, and how did you fill those?
So I think the hole was the opposite, right, of Aimee and Kyle, which is I did not come from a super investing oriented background. I did have quantitative skills from my engineering days. So basically the way that I spun that around was, I know that I can do quantitatively rigorous activities, right? But finance is it's like learning a new language, kind of like the way that I had to learn engineering. So it's just a matter of spending the time to do that. So what did I do? Of course, I focused on a program like Booth, famous for finance, and I addressed that. I made it a case to take as many of the challenging and interesting finance courses, and I made it a point to get involved with other kinds of engagements, or when I was getting involved with startups, right, get involved with trying to create their financial model. I was trying to build that experience up in the classroom and with the internships as well. But then separate from that, I really leaned into the experience that I had building go-to-market strategies, right? Assessing business models. We did a ton of that in consulting. So that's really where I shined in my interview process and through the internship as well. And I made sure that people knew that, and I was able to demonstrate that. But I was actively working on filling in the lack of that investing acumen and track record the best that I could.
Yep, completely agree. So, similar quantitative background. I'm sure if anyone's here who's been a consulting, the pains of making Excel models at 4 a.m. in the morning at client side, or at a hotel. So I think for me, what worked was I spent a summer at Neo Capital, which is a mobility VC firm. I got that because I happened to be interning at Cruise, and one of the GPs who was an alum said, hey, once you're done with your time at Cruise, you want to come work with me. So I think the point there is having a internship in VC, even if it's just a very short one, or maybe it's not during the summer, it's part-time during the year. Maybe even if it's a smaller firm, because they tend to be more flexible with their programs. That really helps set you up well for post MBA. And then, so, I also add kind of a recruiter perspective here. So when I look for candidates, I do look for kind of startup experience, because I think that founder sympathy is super important. And, while you shouldn't call yourself an operator if you've only, spent, 6 months, 12 months at a startup, I do think it gives you a lot to relate to. So, transparently, when I get resumes, and if it's just consulting, I probably wouldn't prioritize those. And I look for someone who's either built something or spent some time at a meaningful startup. Because, if I put myself in the founder's shoes and someone like that reached out to me versus someone who worked at a startup or had built something in the past, I'd probably take the call of someone, with that relevant experience. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Amazing perspectives. I think to quickly summarize to kind of what Aimee and Kyle, all these guys are saying, understand what your strengths are and make sure you highlight them, like Dana and Aimee has said. And then make sure you're working on the things that you're not sort of perceived going to be holes there. And then showing, right, that you can operate and succeed in this environment, and just getting a foot in the door. I think so, right? So many of our conversations with candidates are level one. Oh, can you do VC? Oh, I can do VC, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, I don't really see it in your background. So let's get them advanced to level 2, level 3. Just having any foot in the door saying some other VC firm hired me and did it already advances you. All right, fine. This person seems like he could sort of, or he or she can do the job. Now let's talk about industry and all this other stuff and kind of advance the conversation in a more like granular detail. So great perspective, guys. And then we'll kind of finish off this this topic with Rishi and Austin. Coming from a corporate side, you guys obviously heavily leaned into your industry expertise. So maybe talk a little bit about how that helped you in the recruiting process.
The first thing I'd say is I had a very similar conundrum as Aimee was mentioning as well of whether I go, obviously had like great operating experience from a big tech perspective, but didn't have the operating experience at a early or even late stage startup. So the question always became like, do I go back in a product role in a startup, or try and go straight into investing? I don't know if I have the right answer here, but from all the investors I spoke to, the 3-month period seemed like a very short amount of time, or even like if you do 6 months, during the semester plus the summer, it's still a short amount of window. So I would say that like getting any kind of investing experience definitely helps quite a bit, because once you get like that first VC internship, which may be unpaid, like you just need to get that first experience, learn the ropes from a good mentor in the fund, and then use that network itself to help you land the other subsequent internships. So in my case, like after my first internship at InQtel, I ended up getting a lot of introductions to my subsequent firms, and kind of just use the approach of going very deep into the particular areas that I was passionate about, rather than going broad, because for me, I felt that coming from industry, having worked in these areas as an engineer and a product manager, I could bring some level of credibility as an operator. So getting investing experience in those areas itself would help me position myself a little bit more stronger of a candidate than kind of investing in multiple, different horizontal industries.
So we focus on kind of what is your value add, Rishi? That makes sense. Austin, before you even jump in, if you were going to on this question, I had a question come in about with regard to life sciences and healthcare VC, how much life science expertise do you actually need? So maybe you can loop that into your answer as well. And so Austin, you can, if you want to take that one, if not, we can keep going.
Yeah, happy to. So I think in any industry, but particularly in healthcare, which is pretty complex and has a lot of regulatory background too, I think coming in with industry knowledge is a huge benefit. And that was really helpful for me in all of my interviews and all of my processes, is just leaning into the fact that I know healthcare, and not only the industry, but also startups and founders. And I could talk to all of that from my previous job, which I think was really helpful. And then filling the gaps, everyone's talked on this, but just like know what you know and know what you don't know. I think I was the only person in my dual program to not get involved in the Haas Healthcare Club, and we all have really limited time. And so instead I got involved in the investing clubs, and I did stock pitch competitions and all of the things that I didn't have in my background. So I think just like knowing that your time is limited and what to focus it on. And for the biotech question, so I don't know who asked that. I was really interested in biotech, which was one of the reasons I came to school. And so I spent my first summer at Genentech to sort of scratch that surface. And now at Foresite, we do a lot of biotech. And so you definitely don't need it. I would say you need to be interested in it and you need to be excited about it. So like I'm taking immunology right now at the School of Public Health, and these more science-based classes that probably most people are not interested in, but I am really interested in it. And so I spend a lot of time like reading clinical trials about various oncology products. And so yeah, you definitely don't need to have a background in it. And if you're interested in it and it's something you're excited about, just sort of go deep into it. I would say pick a subsector. Like biotech is really broad. So whether it's bio-onc or whatever it is, like go deep. And I think in general, what I tell all MBA students is like, you don't need a specific background for anything. Everyone goes to business school because they want to get into a different job. So just lean into that and don't worry about people asking you like, okay, if you're interested in biotech, why didn't you do it before? Because that doesn't matter. Just find ways to prove that you're interested and that you can learn it.
Great, great, great. So awesome, guys. So there's two more sections that we want to cover today. One is networking and one is interview. So let's kind of go through those. The next section is on networking. We got a lot of questions ahead of the session on sort of how do you build your list and et cetera. So I want to hear from our panelists a couple of different areas. How did you guys personally kind of do one of two things, or what do you recommend for candidates to sort of think about? How do they start building out their, firm outreach lists or, VC lists, et cetera? And then how should they go about then interacting with those people, and what should those communications look like?
Yeah, well, thanks, Kaushik. So for me, I took a two-pronged approach. So first was kind of really doubling down on my existing networks. So kind of really leaned in onto my network at M12, which was Microsoft's venture arm, to get basically a list of venture funds that were co-invested with them in the particular industries that I like. So the industries for me were applied AI, kind of data infrastructure companies, and emerging areas like quantum computing. So I basically tried to come up with the lead partners in the funds that were most active with the network that I already had, to get warm introductions on one hand. On the other hand, I basically, as I was developing the venture thesis areas that I was looking into, I looked at the top funds that were the most active in that area, and then basically tried to contact the partners and the principals working at those funds to basically break my way in like that.
Great. Other folks, how did you guys create your lists? What worked, what didn't?
I'm happy to just quickly talk through it. So 3 things that worked well that I took advantage of is versus just classes. And I'm sure every school has this, but I'm sure you have VC classes, entrepreneurship classes, and very likely there's going to be a GP or a partner or someone who comes in and speaks in one of those classes. So definitely just network from that. The second piece is going through alums. So my experience, 99% of alums are happy to talk to you if you just reach out and say, hey, I'm from your school, I'm in the program right now, especially recent alums, because we've been in your shoes, we know how hard it is, and there's just a bit more empathy. Maybe someone who's 20 years out and they've just forgotten what it's like to be a desperate MBA student, may not be as open, but most associates, principals who've just came out of the MBA program will be happy to help. And the third thing that was super useful is just clubs. So there's a VC club at Stanford. I'm sure there's one at every other school in the world. So just being a part of that, being involved, I find is super helpful. So I wasn't part of the VC club, but I was part of other clubs. But you can use that position as a platform to bring folks in to speak on panels, et cetera. And then you build a relationship from there, and it's an authentic relationship. And then when you do go out to recruit, you have the email, right? So you can just hit them up on the email chain and say, hey, yada yada yada. So those are the 3 resources I found super helpful. In terms of building a list, you can just go on the Midas list and just pull all the firms off there, and there's at least 100 names on there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Alex is saying about making sure it's authentic and that you have a real reason to reach out. So I'm in a club at school called Wharton Venture Partners, and we actually present to different VCs every year. And so we write our own investment thesis, and then we go out, we present to them. And so with that, we're meeting them face to face. We have a reason to go see them, and they kind of get to know you a little better. And then I'm also helping to throw a conference, an investing conference. And again, it's an excuse to reach out to all these VCs and ask them to join this conference. And then, you get to name out there, you get to chat with them, kind of maybe drop in there hey, I'm also recruiting. So I think the key is to be really authentic about it, and to, offer them something a little sometimes too, because I think, they get asked for a lot of things and rarely do they ever get offered something that they maybe would be interested in. So kind of think about how you can really add value to them.
Just kind of add to kind of how I thought about the process and when I was building my list. As I was talking about before, I was really kind of focusing in on, okay, where's my past experience in semiconductor CVC, and then broadening out that to deep tech. So I was really thinking kind of from the actual deals. So I would look at different deals and look at the people who were leading those investments, who were on those syndicates, and kind of build my list that way. So okay, what are the kind of startups I'm really interested in? What are the companies? What are the sectors? And who is making those investments in that area? Who's doing that actively? And then figure out, both the different funds that are doing those investments, but also if you can find out who the partner is who's making those investments, that's also very powerful. Because if you can go, have that conversation with a specific partner and you're really interested in that area and that's somewhere they've invested in, that's a lot, stronger connection. And then, I think I definitely echo a lot of what other people have said about, how to, be authentic networking, how to kind of build out that list and build out your network. But one thing I would say too is when you're thinking about the companies you're looking at, I think look beyond even the companies that you have. I would start with, people who are alumni of your school, people that are already in your network. Those are kind of easy places to start, but have a list larger than that, because a lot of times when I would talk to people at VC firms, they'd be very happy to make intros to people at other firms that they know. And the VC industry is very interconnected. So if you have an idea of, I'm interested in this area and I know these firms are doing investments there, they may ask you, like, is anyone else that you want to talk to? And if you have that list ready, that's very effective. And you can really build your network quickly that way by having them do warm intros to people they know in the industry. And that can really quickly kind of get you a big spread of different firms to talk to.
Great points, guys. And the one thing on Kyle's point is, people want, this is part of social capital, right? People want to introduce Kyle or Aimee or Dana or Austin or all these guys to other people who are, think that they're great. So the key is actually establishing your own candidacy or your own self as a legitimate person that they wouldn't mind introducing themselves to someone else. So all the things you're working on in terms of idea generation and how you come across, all that stuff, presenting you in the right light will then open doors.
Yeah, and I kind of can say like two things about that. One is, and I think this has been said before as well, is try to go really deep in an area, especially when recruiting, and that means like deeper than even just like a kind of a subsector of industry. Go really deep on certain applications or certain area that you can really build kind of a competitive advantage in. And maybe, again, not always, but maybe you'll know something that the VCs you're talking to don't, because you've gone really deep in this one area and you can provide some extra value that way. But also I'd say it's not always about, at least in the recruiting stage, about, giving them something they don't know. It's really about showing that you really put the thought in and you really have conviction around a certain thesis or certain idea or a certain startup, and really showing that conviction and showing that to the person you're talking to. So even if it's, they've heard of the company, they already have an opinion, maybe they don't even like that sector or that company, but if you show that you put the effort in and you have that conviction around it, I think that is very valuable, even if it's not something new to them. Great
point, Kyle. One follow-up to the points you guys just made. In terms of your email communications, we got a lot of questions earlier about, should they include, deal sheets or things that you've worked on in the past? Should you include like your packet of ideas that you guys have, et cetera? So what are your recommendations on what the email should look like, right? When it's trying to reach out to people at the initial stage or maybe the first, second sort of back and forth. Maybe you guys can give some advice to folks on what works and what doesn't.
So that's actually a great point. So how I got this role, I emailed the partner, and he's a friend. So I emailed him, ignored my email for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then I shot him a note saying, hey, this PhD candidate that I met is raising for his startup right now. I think you should check it out. He responds. So I think timely information, and if it's, you're at school, right? So I'm sure, you'll get to meet folks from others, whether it's your classmate or folks from other schools in the engineering school. And you're like, hey, these guys are raising. And if it's like Wharton, CBS, these are all great schools. And you'll say, hey, like this guy's super sharp. He's raising, he's talking to, VCs of, we're all sheep. So he's talking to Andreessen and Sequoia. You should probably talk to him too. Very likely you're going to get a, response. So timely information. And to answer James's question on whether or not, they have a connection to these folks, just check LinkedIn. 99% of the time, once a VC meets a founder, they're going to connect them with them on LinkedIn. So if the VC isn't connected to the founder, then you can assume it's a fresh lead. But yeah, like all the firms have all that stuff, and they look for students on campus who can be the eyes and ears, because there's a lot of great startups coming out of every school around the country and the world.
Awesome. Did any of you guys use like deal sheets or packets of here are my 10 ideas here, and I'll send it out to you, or did you save those for the interview process?
I basically use the middle ground approach that you just mentioned here, where I have a Google Doc that I've created, which kind of just lists like, two of my thesis areas with one memo sample, a one-page memo sample of a company that I would recommend for the firm. And I attach that as kind of a link with a short 1-paragraph email about, introducing myself and my interest in that particular area. And usually I found that gives a better hit rate than attaching a document, because oftentimes actually a lot of funds, if they see a document attached, sometimes the email just goes into spam, or it goes into a black hole that they never respond on.
Got it. So figure out what works for you, and sort of, yeah, I personally think like keeping the email short and sweet, but also showing some stuff that you could do. Maybe it's links of here are 5 companies I've looked at, check these out, or here's sort of quick write up like Rishi was mentioning. I think anything that shows a little bit more insight into you, I think is always helpful, because they can make a decision. Like, you know, we talked about in the P panel, VCs are also in the business of saying yes or no in a quick manner, right? So you can either say yes, hey, this is someone I want to talk to, or no, it's sort of, you know, kind of avoids you being this gray area where they're like, I don't know, you know, maybe, and going through resumes and stuff. So I think that's sort of what we found helpful. All right, the last topic of today's discussion is going to be interviews. I would love actually to get all of our speakers to answer the question about interviews. So maybe you guys can talk about, you know, I think just from experience of having done this over the last few years across PE, VC, and all these different industries, VC is just so unique in that I almost think there's added elements of evaluation. One, because of supply demand imbalance. Number two, because, you know, the industry gravitates towards a lot more experience than less. So people are constantly kind of saying, no, you know, we need to see more, we need to see more. And three, because it requires this unique kind of combination of investment, operational, behavioral, all these different things that are not, you know, that's not actually how maybe private equity or, you know, other industries work. So in that context, right? So what is some of the candidates' experience between what types of questions they were asked, what types of skills they were asked to demonstrate, how they were asked to demonstrate this in the interview process?
I would say that in the interviews that I've had, they've definitely been multiple rounds. Like in the first round, it's always kind of behavioral, getting to know you, kind of getting a sense of why you want to do VC. So you really do need to have like a very compelling story for why VC, other than just like, I don't know, it's cool and everyone wants to do it. And then secondly, be prepared for a case study. So all the interviews that I've had at funds, they usually make you do some sort of case study, kind of show a work product. So, you know, if you just kind of, you know, hopefully you have resources from people who have done it before to see what a case study looks like. Hopefully the first time you do one won't be the first time you've seen one. And so, you know, practicing those sort of skills. And then just like asking people like from your school kind of who else have done this before, you know, the resources that they have that they've used before. And I think that's been really helpful. And then in terms of like work product, if you do have something that you've put together, either like your own investment thesis or things like that shows that you have done this work before, that's also been really helpful. Like I wouldn't shoot it off randomly, but I would always somehow bring it up in conversation during an interview in some way, kind of like, oh, you know, somehow bring it back to this thesis. And then like, hey, by the way, I also have this deck that I'm happy to share with you if you're interested. And so, you know, kind of be able to, you know, hopefully give them something more tangible during the interview that's maybe a little bit outside of what they directly ask for, but also would hopefully provide some value to them as well.
I was primarily interviewing for later stage. So there was also always a financial component. So like Aimee said, first round was typically always behavioral, just like also my opportunity to ask a bunch of questions. So I'd also say come prepared with questions about that firm, specifically about their portfolio, like show that you've done your homework, you spent time on their website, all of that. Second round would be either the finance sort of quiz, whatever you want to call it, and or a case study. For the finance stuff, for those of you who are interested in slightly later stage, I would say the resources, I mean, Kaushik has tons of great resources, back of the envelope LBO, like the ones that just sort of make you think on your feet and get through the numbers quickly and just drill through those. Like at first, at least for me, I didn't have a finance background. They were really hard and really intimidating. And once you do them a few times, you don't think twice about it. I would also say, always be prepared. I had an interview once that I thought was going to be behavioral and it was not. And I was very unprepared and it was just really embarrassing and awkward. So like be prepared for a case study, be prepared for a financial quiz. And the case studies too, I would say that, at least in my experience, I think they're much more interested in how you think about things and getting to the right answer. Honestly, same with the finance ones. If they're having you do like a quick model, getting the right answer is a lot less important than being able to articulate how you're thinking about things as you go through it. So over vocalize, over communicate, and just share your process. And then typically after those rounds, it would be back to like the behavioral with partners if you hadn't met them yet, just to make sure you meet everyone. And I think so much of that, like we've all harped on with all these questions, but is about like the networking component and the personal sort of relationship building. Like, can you get to know these people? Can you find a way to connect with them? So those were my processes.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. I think on the resource point, as Austin mentioned, all of our business schools that we've trained at this fall already have all the LBO stuff, but there's definitely on the Elevate platform, if people want more, there's VC growth equity training that's taught by like 6 VC investors. Like, get informed and stuff on that. And there's also private equity trainings, to Austin's point, that we've obviously delivered to all these different universities. The question around, like, I think on the VC side depends a little bit, but I think there's also an expectation to know kind of how term sheets work and just generally how like deals work, right? It's very different from PE, right? And the different types of, all the different rights and all the different things that you're looking for in a venture capital deal, which is a little bit different than the PE side. So I would say try to familiarize yourself as well on kind of how deals get done, because, in some sense, when you're coming on as an associate or VP, you are sort of the quarterback of the deal as well. So just demonstrating that ability as well also goes a long way. Alex and Dana, from your end on evaluating candidates, sort of what do you like to see on the interview side, and sort of what are mistakes people make, or sort of what are the things that stand out to you in that process?
In terms of the interview itself, as I said earlier, I look for 3 things. One is just how excited or how well does this person present themselves, how well do they articulate themselves, how well do they pitch themselves, because they'll be pitching the firm, right? And they'll be pitching startups to our partners. So if you can't pitch yourself well, then likely you're not going to be able to pitch the firm or the deal well internally. Second piece is, to everyone's point here, having researched, having a peek, whether it's an industry or a function, and being able to showcase that and explain how you're going to use that, leverage that to, kind of basically get founders to pick up the phone. And then the third piece is just around kind of motivation and story. So, it's hard to say, but I'm almost sometimes suspicious of people who say, hey, I've been wanting to be a VC since I came out of college, and it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, who wants to be a VC in college? So, if the story has to be authentic, like, hey, I worked with this startup, I helped the founder fundraise, it was such a fascinating process, or I built a company before, and I really want to help other founders build it. Something like that. It just has to connect the dots. So yeah, that's why, to my earlier point, if you were just in consulting this whole time, you hadn't worked in any startups before, it's harder for me to understand why. And I think the why is just super important. That's my answer.
So I agree, the reason for early stage investing, I think, can be illuminating. You'd be surprised at the number of students who don't really have a reason, and it's pretty easy for us to tell when you talk to these students a lot. So just, be real, say whatever your actual reason is. The other thing I would say is you're almost guaranteed at some point that to be dissecting and discussing at least one startup or a couple, right? And it's not that we're looking for a right or wrong answer, but I would say that one common mistake I see a lot of people do is they use the same framework, thinking that every company is going to fit exactly like this. If it were that easy, we would not be spending the time talking to you about it. You have to understand the context, the market, right, that this is operating in, adjust it to whatever space it's in, and think about what are the unique questions, the real pressure points that you need to poke to figure out whether or not you would put your own money behind that. That's a question that you should be asking. And second of all, no startup is ever going to be perfect. It's just not. It's an early stage startup. It's resource constrained. They're making a lot of bets. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So while it's cool to make a bet and say I have conviction in this, be very upfront about what you think the risks, concerns are, and how they could potentially mitigate that risk. I always ask people, and after I ask them, what startup would you invest in? I always ask, well, what are reasons why someone would not want to invest despite all the great things that you just told me, right? You have to be able to think in a 360-degree view. That's the kind of critical thinking that an investor should have.
Amazing. So many great insights, guys. I think we've gone through a lot of topics today and sort of, I think, try to cram this all in and hopefully, give you guys a supplementary education, right? That you should all be aware of, and the best ways to get that is from people who've been through the process. So we're gonna sort of why don't we end with every single panelist sort of sharing their one sort of tidbit of advice, right, to all of our future venture capital and growth equity investors that are in the forum here today, and we'll be kind of accessing this afterwards. If there's one thing you wish you'd known, done sooner, or impart upon this sort of the next generation, what would that be? And we'll kind of close with that.
It's a super, super small world. So be nice, be respectful to everybody. Always think about what you can give first, not what you can take. You'd be surprised how good karma goes around, as does bad karma too. So treat everybody well and mean it.
right? People want to work with people that they like. So that's great. So yeah, let's keep going. Others can sort of give their wisdom.
Always be open to meeting people and take the coffee chat, even if it's someone you don't think is going to be on the right path for you, and do it, as Donna just said, like in a nice and open and warm way, because you just never know what can come of that. It's a tight community.
Yeah, it's tight community. It's also hustle, and it is a job, right? In the job, you are meeting with the hundreds of founders before you are kind of doing these deals. So if the recruiting process is draining, then I think you should really think about the job itself, because it's kind of very similar in that sense. So okay, that's great. Others,
just like, don't be discouraged. Like, if this is really what you want to do, and this is like your be all end all goal, but there's other opportunities that will come along, and you might get tired because it is a really long process. I feel like I never stopped recruiting, but like, if this is really what you want to do, you just kind of have to like know yourself and like believe in yourself that you can make it and get there. And so, even if other things pop up that you're like, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm just going to take this one thing that maybe isn't exactly what I want to do. Like, kind of maybe it's worth, holding out for that, opportunity that gets you really, really excited about. So like, don't be discouraged if it takes a really long time, or if it's like, May or whatever, you still don't have anything. Like, everyone's process is different. And if you really, really want to do, and you're putting in the work and the legwork and, do everything you're supposed to do, like, I think everyone can, kind of get close to that goal.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the other kind of extension to that is that it's not the end all be all that you have to all do this right after the MBA, right? If you go in and talking to a lot of people and say, hey, really want you to build the operating experience, maybe you go and get a year of operating experience and come back to those VCs a year after you graduate and say, hey, I have done this already, sort of now give me a chance. So I think this is one of those things that's a medium-term sort of career. And it's sort of the most important thing for all of you guys is finding the things that you're actually like passionate about and actually good at, right? So I think that whether it takes a year, half a year, or 2 years, sort of, it doesn't matter in the long run. So set yourself up for success kind of throughout your career that way. Excellent. Thank you, Aimee. That's super helpful. Kyle, Rishi, Alex, any parting thoughts for your guys?
Yeah, it sounds simple, but really, get organized, because both the recruiting process and kind of your day-to-day in venture itself can be very disorganized, and it's not structured. So going into kind of both of those processes with an idea of like what you're looking to get out of it, what do you want to learn, what do you want, like, if in the recruiting process, who do you want to talk to, what firms you want to reach out to, what kind of areas you're interested in, and when you go into the internship, what kind of work do you want to be doing? What do you hope to gain from the internship? What do you hope to learn? Kind of what it would be success for you coming out of that internship, and just have an idea of that going in. Because, unlike, some other MBA careers or MBA, post-MBA careers, there's not a really structured path, from recruiting through your job in venture. So it's really having that idea and building that yourself as early as you can is very important.
I would say, like, in addition to everything that's already been said, is to just believe in yourself and remain focused. I think one of the biggest challenges in venture recruiting is that as the months go by, especially in the spring semester, people start to get uneasy and they start second guessing themselves. And then they often, end up compromising on an offer or an opportunity that they believe that, they absolutely have to take. Otherwise, they may not break into venture before the end of the summer. And I think that's you have to constantly remind yourself to not do that and not give into that. So I think that just believing in yourself would be kind of the biggest advice I would give.
I think also just do the job. You don't need a permission to be a VC. It's not like being a doctor where you have to get a license. You can do a lot of the stuff on your own. So investing, for example, you can angel invest. Maybe you're in school, so you don't have a lot of cash, but you can go on AngelList and make $1,000 investments into startups, right? So you can start getting that track record already. You're building market maps and meeting founders. You don't need to be at a VC firm to do that. So I think a lot of the things, the more you can prepare and the more you can show, hey, I've got these skill sets and I've got these relationships, I've made decent investments in the past, etc. The stronger you'll be when you interview with these firms. And in worst case scenario, you get to you're an amazing angel investor. You start your own solo fund, and you build the next mega Andreessen yourself. So just get started. You don't need someone's permission to do venture.
Excellent. Well, rousing sort of advice from all of our panelists. First of all, I do want to thank all of you guys, like, you know, all the 6 panelists that we've had on today, for the invaluable advice that you guys have given for these folks and for the audience. So thank you guys all so much. You know, big round of applause for all the panelists for spending their Friday afternoon with all of us. And then thank you guys, all the students and student leaders, etc. You know, that, you know, you guys will be on the panel hopefully in the next couple of years to come. So, you know, work at it, work really hard. We have tons more VC programming, growth equity. You know, like I said, we've had over 70 firms and professionals that have been on the platform. So we have 400 or 500 videos that are just completely free for you guys to access on recruiting and all this other stuff. So go out and get informed, take control of your careers, and, you know, best of luck to you. And then sort of, you know, again, thank you all for the panelists, guys. Really appreciate your time and the insights. And on that note, everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll chat, you know, we'll see everyone soon, and happy holidays.